Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another real estate podcast. My name's Kevin Thatcher, the founder and CEO. That's right, Chief Everything Officer here at Independence Title, coming back to you with another amazing video and audio podcast. Today, I have my friend Calvin Sibley with Solutions Home Buyers, and we're talking about novations, which is becoming the newest, hottest topic in real estate investing. So, Calvin, welcome to the show today. Appreciate you hopping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kevin.
You're welcome. So let's just talk briefly. Let's just give them like the Reader's Digest version. What is a novation? People are hearing about it all the time. I get calls probably every single day asking about novations. Tell everyone a little bit about what a novation is.
Yeah, so the actual definition of a novation is just the replacement of one party in a contract with another party. So it's very commonly used in commercial real estate or subleases, right? So if you have a rental, right, you have a lease and you want to sublease the apartment to another tenant, you would replace yourself in the lease agreement with another tenant. So it's just the replacement of one party in a contract with another party. That's the definition of a novation, right?
So let me ask you a question. So for the investors that are on here, you know, they take YouTube University Real Estate Investing 101. So they've heard about it. Why wouldn't someone do an assignment of contract versus a novation? Why would they do a novation instead?
Yeah, so typically assignments are done, right? Wholesale transactions are when you're going to get a property under contract significantly below market value, right? Where you can buy it at such a cheap price that you can then assign it to an investor, a cash buyer, for an assignment fee. The issue is that what we found a lot of the times is the price you have to buy the property for to make it work as a wholesale transaction doesn't always work for the seller. Right. So the standard, the traditional formula for calculating a wholesale offer is 70% of the after repair value minus repairs minus the assignment fee. Right. But that price oftentimes is too low for a seller, whether they need more money to move, they've got a mortgage, for whatever reason, it just doesn't make sense for them. But when you offer them a novation, you can offer them more money. Right. So you're offering them more money than you could with a wholesale transaction if you're looking to assign the contract.
All right. So to explain what he's saying here to the people watching, so we're talking about really doing something that's in the best interest of the seller versus what may be just in the best interest of your, traditional real estate investor that just wants to get in, get out, and get paid. We're really talking about a partnership in a strategy that is going to hopefully net the investor more money, but more importantly, net the seller more money by being able to open the pool of buyers to not your typical investor that may just fix it and rent it. We're potentially selling, I would assume, to an FHA buyer that could potentially get a loan on the property.
Well, that's exactly what we're doing. We're able to essentially wholesale the transaction to a retail buyer. So we weren't able to do this, for forever. You weren't able to wholesale a property to a buyer who's getting a mortgage. But with a novation, you actually are. Okay, so we could talk about the benefits to an investor and the benefits to a seller. The benefits to an investor, I touched on this, right? You can offer the seller more money than you could with a wholesale transaction. So if you're generating leads online or doing direct mail, you'll be able to convert more of those leads into deals, into transactions, because you can offer the sellers more money. All right. So you're turning some of your dead leads into potential transactions or closed transactions. The benefits to the seller are that you're giving them all the benefits of a cash offer, right? You're essentially saying, look, sign up with me. We're going to handle everything. You don't pay commissions. You don't pay closing costs. We handle all the repairs and you close in your timeline. Right. So that's the benefit to them. Now, the question most people ask is, why wouldn't the seller, why wouldn't they just list it themselves? Right. And the answer is it's a little more nuanced than that. Right. There are going to be some sellers who just want to list it themselves. They want to fix up the house. list it with a realtor and just sell it that way. But what we found is not every seller wants to do that, right? So the house may need some work, it may need some repairs. They may just not want to deal with a realtor. It may seem pretty simple. Just list your house with a realtor and get it sold, but there's actually quite a bit that goes into that, right? First of all, you've got to find a realtor. 50% of realtors are part-time. It's actually 51% are full-time, 49% are part-time, which means half the agents out there aren't even full-time. They've got another job, right? So first you got to find a good realtor, then you got to have good pictures taken. But if the house is full of stuff, right, sellers don't know how to get their house ready to be shown, and realtors, half of them don't even do a good job getting the house listed either. They're part-time. So there's a percentage of sellers, right, who need that help, right? They need help. Maybe they're just a little elderly. They don't want to move the stuff out of the house, whatever it is. We go in there, almost consult with them and solve their problems and get the house sold. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And for those of you just tuning in, welcome to the Real Estate Podcast. We're talking about the newest, hottest craze you've heard on the internet, Novations. It's on all the real estate blogs, and Calvin's here joining us today. We've done a lot of business over the years together as a real estate investor, closing his deals. And I think the important part that you've covered here, and the one question, and we'll talk about the benefits to investors, but the one question that most people will say is, well, your traditional bank or your FHA buyer doesn't allow investors to flip deals. And that's the important part here is this isn't an assignment of contract. This isn't a double closing where we're going to have two contracts. This is literally a substitution of a contract. So there is only going to be one contract. It is going to be the seller to the eventual end buyer, with you being in the middle doing this novation agreement. So for those people watching, I know a lot of people ask that question. Well, why wouldn't we just do an assignment? Or why, or banks don't allow it. Just like we say banks don't allow double closings. That's correct. Your traditional bank doesn't, although we have had one recently that has allowed it without a problem. But very common, they don't allow it. So it's a great point here. So we talked a little bit about the benefits, to the seller. Obviously, this is a program that is looking out really for the best interest of the seller. It's not looking out for the best interest of the investor, although it's going to help the investor. It's looking out for the best interest of the seller, finding a way to net them a little bit more money than they would get if they just sold it to the traditional investor. And we'll talk in a minute about how it benefits in Florida, because I'm seeing some challenges in Florida just because it seems like properties need way more work. We'll maybe cover a couple of case studies you've had. But let's talk about the investor. Why should an investor, if an investor can flip a deal, what's the benefit of them? Like, this is going to take obviously a lot longer. It's going to take a lot more negotiations. I just tried to get an investor to do a novation, and he's like, nah, I don't want to bother them with it. And I'm like, no, this is a specific case for a novation. So why should an investor do it? What are the benefits, maybe the pros, the cons on their side of it?
Well, we touched base on this already. We talked about how you can offer sellers more money, right? Especially for wholesalers, this is a great strategy. But this also is great for, just fix and flip and realtors. I'm going to share a couple resources at the end of this that are free, so stay tuned for that. But for investors, again, the benefit is you're able to make more money. You're able to be more money per transaction. You're more transparent with the seller. You're offering them more money, and there's less risk, right? So if you're going to go out and close on a property, use a hard money loan, maybe put some of your own money into it or raise private funds. That's a lot more labor intensive, time intensive, capital intensive, and a lot more risky, especially if you're new. If you've never done a rehab, you're going to go out there and you're going to close on a house and then try to fix it up yourself. That seems risky to me. Or raise money from your friends and family and then risk their money. I mean, it seems like you're risking your relationship. Everybody talks about private money, but you better know what you're doing. So there's very little risk, because the thing is, with a novation, you're being 100% transparent with the seller. Okay, you're telling the seller from the initial call that your intention is to resell the property. right? So that's another benefit. Wholesalers go out, they get a contract with a seller, and what do? They go market it to get a buyer, but that seller thinks that in the wholesaler is actually closing on it, but instead they're just trying to flip it and assign it. But here we're being transparent with the seller, telling them our intention, and then telling them, look, we're going to be marketing this for a retail buyer that's going to come in and they're going to buy the home, and you're going to have a contract directly with them. Okay, not everybody will agree. Some people just say, I want to list it myself. That's fine. But there are a percentage of people who will agree because they don't want to deal with all the things we spoke about, right? Listing it, pictures, open houses. They don't want to deal with that. So that's the benefit, right? To answer your question, there's less risk than doing a rehab. And if you want to eventually start doing rehabs in the future, you could start by doing this and get really good at estimating repairs and get really good at talking to sellers and running comps and negotiating and all of those things, but with very little risk. Very little risk. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, so listen, I personally love low risk, high reward deals. It makes super sense. For those of you just tuning in, welcome to the Real Estate Podcast. We're interviewing today Calvin Sibley with Solutions Home Buyers, talking about Novations. So let's now talk a little bit. I know we're going to give some resources at the end. Let's just talk about a deal or two that you've seen. Full disclosure, we've had a few come across our desk, and a lot of times it's one of our agents that has worked on them. And what they've found is that they've just found a buyer and they wound up just acting as an agent, not actually going through that process. But so let's just talk about the process, because I know here in Florida it's a little bit more challenging, because I think what we've seen, and my research again, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, my research seems to be that the renovation requirements here in Florida seem to be much higher. So it's a lot more riskier for that investor coming in to do some repairs, where some of the other people I know doing them out of state, they're putting in $2,500 or $5,000 as opposed to $50,000 in repairs. So let's talk a little bit, let's walk them through a timeline of what a deal looks like, so maybe they can better understand, this novation process.
Well, sure. We're nationwide, right? We've been investing, first of all, in South Florida for over 10 years. That's how we met, back with BRIA, the Broward Real Estate Investor Association. I believe that's how we first met. But we started investing nationwide during the COVID pandemic about 3 years ago. So we're running ads. We get leads all over the country. So we could just take one we closed last month, little town in Burkesville, Kentucky. Very small town, maybe 14,000 people in the entire county. So it all starts with what we call the discovery call. That's the initial call with the seller, where we go over their situation and find out their problem, right? What is the motivation? Why do they want to sell? Okay, so it all starts with that. If there's no motivation, typically there's no deal, right? So we spoke to the seller. It was actually owned by a mother and daughter. They owned it together. The mother was elderly. She lived in the house. She wanted to downsize. It was too much house for her. She wanted to live closer to her kids. And so originally their asking price, it was too high for a cash offer. It was too high, not to mention it was a rural town, which means what? There are fewer investors. Okay, down here in South Florida, there's a ton of investors, but in a small town in Kentucky, much fewer, right? So the chance of wholesaling that goes down because there are fewer buyers, plus her price was too high. So we do the initial call, the discovery call. We ran the comps, went back to her, and then we use a low comparable sale to anchor her. That's called the anchor phase, we call it. We bring the sellers back to earth, right? Because they all want full cash, right? Retail price, no repairs done by them, no commissions, no closing costs, but the benefit of a cash offer. And it's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. So we have to bring them back to earth a little bit by anchoring with a low comp. That will get them down typically in price to a price that hopefully makes sense for us. Okay, but then we pivot and we go from a cash offer to, hey, our intention is to find a buyer for your home. Here's everything we're going to do. Are you okay with that? We just explain everything to them. We're transparent. And if they agree, it's very similar. If you're a wholesaler, right, it's a purchase agreement, but there are just a couple other documents you have to send that the seller signs. So it's not that complicated to get these additional documents signed by the seller, but it's very important that they sign them. Okay, what you don't, and I'll get into things to do and not do, but what you don't want to do is just get a contract to buy a property, then list it on the MLS, or you can't do that. But if the seller gives you permission, now you have the power, you benefited by the power of the MLS, because now you're listing it on the MLS and all the realtors and all the buyers in that town are able to see it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what are the typical things you're doing to the property? Obviously, you're going to give this list of stuff. So you get it on the contract, because we're obviously trying to showcase that it doesn't make sense for you to just list it with your typical agent. What are some of these things that we're going to be doing to that property to net a higher return on investment?
Yeah, so typically it's taking all the stuff out of the house, all the seller's furniture, boxes. This was a perfect example, actually. The house in Burkesville, Kentucky. She was kind of a hoarder. This lady lived there probably 25 years, right? 30 years. So it was full of stuff. And she just wasn't able to move the stuff out. So that's where we'll go and clean the stuff out and then get the house painted and then cleaned. That alone, it doesn't cost that much, maybe a couple $1,000, right, for a moving company and to have a house painted. But it makes a huge difference because sellers can't see it, right? If they're in the house, right, kind of, they don't have that objective view of what it looks like or smells like, right? They don't think it smells bad. It smells bad, right? It smells bad. So going in there, cleaning out the furniture, cleaning the house, painting it, and then typically if there's any like stains on the ceiling, painting that, just fixing any little thing around there. Typically we look for houses that need $5,000 of repairs or less that we can have done within 5 days. That's kind of our rule. So if there's structural issues, roof issues, foundation, it's too much work, that should just be a wholesale deal to a cash buyer because somebody's going to have to rehab that whole house, right? But cosmetic stuff, that's where we can go and help the seller, and it's going to show so much better once it's listed.
Awesome. So for those of you again tuning in, we're talking about novations today, which is again a very hot topic. And here is a perfect example where Calvin shared with us how you put a little what we call lipstick on a pig. Put a little lipstick on a pig, $5,000 in work in the house, and hopefully you net a much higher return. And just to give everyone that is watching again, if you're a little bit confused, scratching your head a little bit, like many people, this is the difference of assignment a deal. You want to do an assignment, a contract, you're assigning it to a regular investor that is not going to give you a high return on investment. Wholesaling a deal, double closing, again, you're selling to an investor. Here is a position where Calvin is walking the seller, holding their hand through a process of where you're telling the seller, I have your back. I'm going to do a little bit of work. I'm going to make a little bit of money. You're going to make more money than if an investor came in because we're going to clean this out. We're going to fix it up. We're going to put a little lipstick on it, make it look good, and sell it now to a much bigger pool of buyers because he can now reach out to an FHA buyer, a VA buyer, or a conventional buyer that wouldn't buy the house in the current condition. When they come and do an appraisal and see what that house looks like, that bank is going to lower that valuation. So he's increasing the value of the home to the benefit of the seller and just getting paid for doing so. So again, that's what a novation is. Let's talk about, this one was a low profit, I think you said, right? You put 5,000 in.
No, we put in less than that. We put in about $1,500 or under 2,000. We made 17,000 on it.
17,000. What would you have made, do you think, if you didn't do that?
I wouldn't have made anything.
Okay.
Because their buy price was too high. And so going back to what you said earlier, you said one of the benefits of a seller is they can make a little more. It's not a little more. They can make a lot more. They're making sometimes tens of thousands of dollars more. It's literally the difference between this making sense for them and not. This would not have been a deal that we would have closed if I had just tried to assign it. Because the numbers didn't make sense and there weren't enough buyers, investors in that area. Okay, it would have only worked as a novation.
Awesome. So this is a little small town. And again, that's more of the common theme that I've heard a lot of the investors are working in these small towns, which is why I haven't seen much of it down here. Does it work also in big cities? Have you done larger deals than this?
Oh yeah, definitely. I could talk about one we closed last year in Miami Shores. That was also a novation. It was a seller who was in pre-foreclosure. He was about to lose the house. About to lose the house. He had a foreclosure sale date about a week after he called me. And so he had said, I spoke to a few investors and they didn't really tell me what to do. I knew exactly what to do. I put him in touch with an attorney. We postponed the foreclosure sale date, but that was actually a property we sold to an investor. We ended up making $250,000 on that deal, Kevin. One deal, okay, but it's because we solved the seller's problem. He wouldn't have made anything if he had lost the house to foreclosure, but that was one, again, the power of the MLS, right? I have a buyer's list in Miami from having worked down here for over 10 years selling investment properties, a pretty big buyer's list, right? Pretty much every investor is on my list. Okay, the highest offer I got for that property was about 950,000. But by listing it on the MLS, we sold it for $1,025,000. Okay, $1,025,000. So we sold it for about $75,000 more just by listing it on the MLS. But again, it's because we got permission from the seller, right? We have the documents that the seller has to sign that gives us permission. So it does work in big cities. It also works in rural towns. Yeah, works in both.
All right, awesome. And you said two important things here. One is that obviously, the typical agent is going to come in and say, well, you can't list this on the MLS. Obviously, this is a process that has been proven that this is what we do. This is how Novation works, where it gives you the right to put it on the MLS. But more importantly, and I wrote about this, I believe in my book, Rescue Your Business, back in 2019, when I coach agents, I tell them you truly need to solve the problem of the seller, which is what you're doing in order to net more money for them, more money for you. And even with this new NAR ruling that's coming down the pipeline, although it's not finalized yet, so I hate to, we're not really saying, what will happen or won't happen because we don't know. But the bottom line with this new NAR ruling for the agents listening is this is very similar to that. You need to learn how to solve the problem of the seller, solve the problem of the buyer, and you will earn a commission for doing so. It's no longer just list the property on the MLS or find them the best home and you're going to get paid. They want to see, why are you solving my problems? What products, services, and benefits are you giving me in order to earn that 3%? So agents, we know you're going to have to start selling your commission. You're going to have to start selling why you earn 3% as a buyer. Why should a buyer pay you 3% if that's the way the ruling goes? Just as Calvin has figured out a way to go to a seller and say, here's why I can net you more money. Here's the problem I'm solving for you. Here's the documents I need you to sign and what I am going to do. And if anything, I think this is better than your typical wholesale or double closing, because we know in an assignment and a double closing, you as the wholesaler, or you as the middle person, is not really being transparent with the seller that you're going to flip it. Now, we know it's legal and you have the right to do so, which is great. So as long as the contract's assignable, you can assign it, or you can do a double closing, but you're not being transparent telling them I'm flipping this, making more money in most cases. So here is a perfect example how you're just doing right by the seller and making a profit for it. So let's talk, before we wrap up and give some of the tools that they can use. I want to talk about one thing, are the mistakes, because what I like to do is educate people, not only how you can make money, but I'm in tons of masterminds, and I think the biggest benefit of a mastermind is I learn the mistakes of other entrepreneurs, and I learn how to not to make those mistakes. So what are some of the mistakes you've seen, maybe some you've made, or things that you try and teach people? Because I know you coach people on this as well, what not to do.
Yeah, you definitely have to be careful getting started with this, making sure you're doing it the right way. There's a lot of information about novations out there. Not all of it is good. So going back to what you just said about wholesaling being legal, got to be careful with that now, though, because if you're nationwide, there's a lot of states that have passed regulations where you have to make a lot more disclosures to the seller, or you have to be licensed in the state. So states like Oklahoma and Illinois, you have to be licensed there. Virginia recently passed that regulation. In Alabama, you have to disclose to the seller your intention to wholesale the property 3 days before you even go to market the home for sale. So if you didn't know about that, research the regulations in Alabama. But by doing this, by using the documents that I've talked about, then for Novation, you are disclosing it. You're disclosing to the seller your intention to find a buyer. So some of the things that I see people doing wrong, okay, first of all, would be just listing a home on the MLS without the seller's permission. All right, big mistake. Don't do that, right? Especially if you're not licensed, okay? Then if you get the seller's permission, another mistake would be using a flat fee brokerage or a flat fee company. Okay, you may think you're saving money on the listing commission, especially if it's a property in another state. Oh, I'm going to save 3%. I don't have to pay a listing agent. But that opens up a ton of liability for the investor, right? I mean, Kevin, how is that not seem like practicing real estate without a license? You're listing a property on the MLS. You're setting up showings, you're fielding offers, you're negotiating offers, and then you're closing transactions. How is that not working without a license, practicing real estate without a license? Now you could say, oh, I've got this attorney in fact document signed, right? But what is a judge going to say if it gets to that point, right? So everybody's happy, everybody's friends when everything's going well. But as you know, Kevin, we've both been doing this a long time. It doesn't always go well. All right. And it's when things go badly, that's when, people can get hurt, right? We're dealing with people's money, their property, their time. These are the most valuable things to people. And it can be personal too, right? It might be their mom's house. It might be the house they grew up in, right? So we're dealing with some very personal stuff. So we've got to be transparent, but using a local agent, you've got to use a local agent to list it. Don't go spend, and I can tell you what the flat fee companies are, right? Brokerless, Houseo, right? There's a bunch of them. Home, which is in Miami, coincidentally, but don't use them, right? Those are for people who, if you own a house and you want to sell your own house that you actually own and you don't want to pay an agent, you want to basically be the agent, go ahead and use them and save the 3%. But if you're doing a novation, don't use a flat fee company. That's a big mistake, okay? The other mistake I've seen, this is crazy, Kevin, you're going to relate to this. So I've seen people we get a limited power of attorney. Okay, that's known as the attorney in fact. That gives us permission to list the house on the MLS. But the only document we're signing is the listing agreement with the realtor. Again, not a flat fee listing, the realtor, right? So I've seen people have the seller sign just like a general power of attorney, and the investor is then signing the listing agreement, the contract with the new buyer, and even the closing documents, Kevin. The closing documents. I kid you not. These people, what kind of liability are you opening yourself up to? The seller, what if they want to stay in the house? I could list 100 things that could go wrong. What if they call, oh, I didn't know my house sold. I wanted to stay here another month. I want my son to move into the house. That happened to me yesterday. The seller called me. They said, we want to keep possession for a few months after the closing, right? You're going to sign the closing documents for the seller. Now, Kevin, you may think, well, if you're listening to this, you may think, well, that's crazy. No one would do that. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. They sign listing agreements, contracts, and the closing documents for the seller. Don't do that. Okay, you got to be transparent with the seller, the agent, and the title company, right? So the only document you're signing, the agreements with the seller, and then the listing agreement with the listing agent, but the seller signs the contract with the buyer. All right, so don't sign the contract with the new buyer. Don't sign the disclosures and just put, I don't know for everything, okay? That's easy, that's lazy, okay? You gotta take the time, talk to the seller, get the seller to fill out the seller's property disclosure, then send it to the listing agent. All right, so those are just some of the mistakes, right? I mean, there's other things like cutting corners, fixing it up, not having really good pictures taken, spend the money, have great pictures taken, work with the agent, and create a great listing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny you say that because I just had a conversation with one of our clients that we've been working with for many years, and we had to part ways because he was actually signing the purchase agreement, the second purchase agreement, and all of the documents on behalf of the seller without even a limited power of attorney. He's like, I just have a joint venture agreement. I'm like, you have no authority to sign that. I can't do that type of bill. I can't just look the other way and hope that it closes. It's not a problem. So we parted ways, and it was fine. I just said, there are people who will probably allow you or not catch it, but I've been in business 23 years, and I don't choose to do business that way. So just like you said, there are people who will take that full power of attorney and think they can sign everything on behalf. And I guess legally you can, but I would be very, very careful because you have a vested interest in that deal. Just like we don't allow real estate agents to sign powers of attorney because they have a vested interest in the deal. We have to be very, very careful. So again, great job. We're going to give some resources. I typed out one quick thing of like the overall of what Novations do. And it says, Novations offer investors great flexibility, better risk management, and more efficiency in the real estate transaction of what you're doing. So this really allows you to adapt to the changing times of sellers wanting more money or thinking they need more money, that they can get more money. So it really helps you adapt to the changing world of real estate. Can be done in Florida, yes. I think it's much better on lower end properties that need a lot less work in other states. But as Calvin has shared with us, they do work here. So as we're running out of time here, Calvin, give us some resources and how the viewers and listeners here can connect with you in order to learn more. I believe you have a training that you do on this.
I do, and I can talk about that a little bit, but the resources that are great for agents or wholesalers or anyone wanting to do novations, there are a couple of companies that will go into a house, they're contractors. They will do the work on the house, and you don't have to pay them until the closing. Okay, so that was the biggest challenge we had. We would get like this lead in Burkesville, Kentucky. Yeah, it needed a couple $1,000s of work. Now I'm tasked with having to go into that city, find a contractor, interview them, hire them, and then manage them remotely. So the two companies I would recommend, one is called Curbio, Curbio. I believe you can just Google search it, Curbio, and then the other one is Novations. So they're not in every market. They're in about 50% of, basically every major market in the United States. They work a little differently. So Curbio goes off the equity in the home. Okay, so they essentially have like a contractor's lien on the house, but they're going to go in, they're going to do the work, and then they get paid at the closing. Novations is actually a line of credit through a bank. I believe it's the Bank of Omaha, the National Bank of Omaha, something like that. But they will give the seller or the investor a line of credit. Okay, so I believe it goes up to about $80,000. Our company, we have a line of credit about $50,000, but that's more than we need. I mean, these houses will usually only need $3,000 to $5,000 of work. But if you're a realtor, okay, and you have a client and they say we want full retail, but it needs 5-10 grand of work, this agent, I implore you to please talk to the seller and bring them back to earth and use that anchoring call and use the low comps and get them to accept a price that's going to make sense for a buyer. Because my opinion is that agents do sellers a disservice by just listing the property at whatever price the seller wants, throwing it up on the MLS and hoping it sells. That worked for the past couple of years when we were in a serious seller's market with only 1 month of inventory. But now, especially, you mentioned the NAR regulation, you have got to go in there, talk to the seller, say, listen, this is what the house needs in work. I understand your mortgage amount is this much. You need to net this much. However, I'm going to suggest we list it at this price, and you're going to do this work to the house. However, you don't have to come out of pocket, right? And so with Novations, I would argue that we're even more valuable than agents because we're actually doing the work for the sellers. Okay, I haven't heard of an agent telling a seller, I'm going to go in and fix up your house and get it ready to be shown. Okay, because that's saying put your money into this house. Now you're really invested, and most agents won't do that. But you want to talk about providing value to the seller? That's how. whether you're paying it for it with a novation or you're an agent, but you're consulting with that seller and you're saying, hey, this is what the house needs. This is how we're going to do the work on it. This is how long it's going to take. But we're going to use these companies where you don't have to come out of pocket up front. Those companies get paid at the closing. So Curbio and Renovation Sells, those would be the two resources I would recommend.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And for those of you that are still listening, this is the Real Estate Podcast. We're interviewing Calvin Silby talking about Novations. So Calvin, give us a little bit of resources to reach out to you, talk about your training you have coming up so people can contact you.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Kevin. I actually created a course called Novations JV Profits, where I'm actually looking to JV with investors, wholesalers, and realtors and do deals together. And so what I've found is that the kind of secret of the information marketing space is that 90% or more of people who buy a course don't go through it. And even if they do, they don't implement it and get results. So in the course, I just talk about the first two steps of every deal, which is getting leads and then talking to the sellers, right? So how do you generate motivated seller leads? And then how do you have that initial call with the seller and what's important to ask and to say to that seller? That's it. Once a JV partner gets the leads, they've spoken to the seller, they submit it to us, and then we take it from there. We close the seller on signing up with us, we get it listed and sold. And so the benefit of this course too is that regardless of what kind of real estate you want to get into, whether it's fix and flip, short-term rental, buy and hold, anything, or even being an agent, you have got to understand that really first step, right? The first step is just getting leads and talking to sellers. But then with Novations, there are 8 additional steps that you have to take to close a transaction. So that's where I've found people who buy courses on Novations, they just get caught up in too much information, paralysis by analysis, and then it's just like information overload and they just give up and never do a deal. So this is designed to start getting leads, start getting people on the phone with sellers, and then we take it through from contract to closing. And then hopefully once those JV partners are kind of comfortable with the process, they can start doing deals on their own. But right now we've got about 9 or 10 JV partners. We closed over 6 figures in the first quarter. So we were about 115,000 in closed, profit for just from Novations, all from JV partner leads. So it's going really well. You can just go to novationsjvprofits.com and check it out there.
Awesome. So novationsjvprofits.com. Calvin, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate all of your insight on Novations. There's really only one big worldwide guru talking about it. There's not many people on our local level here that I can actually have conversations with about it. So I've enjoyed our time here. And for those of you looking to reach out to Calvin, connect with him, tell him you heard it on the Real Estate Podcast. And hopefully you too will bring us some Novations and make more money in real estate. So Calvin, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kevin.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next time on the Real Estate Podcast. Have a great day. Bye-bye.